Okay, so I am here with Karima. Hello, Karima.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us on Let's Talk Racism. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your heritage?
Well, I'm 21. I go to the University of Southampton. My heritage is Egyptian Ethiopian.
Wow.
I was born in the UK though.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about it.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So what are you most proud about from your heritage? What makes you the most proud?
There's so much of my heritage that makes me proud. I was raised very much in touch with my culture. My first language was Arabic.
Wow.
And I guess my favourite thing is probably sense of community. There's always a very strong sense of community in my culture. I also love how different it is. I think we should be celebrating differences, and I embrace my culture 100%.
Good. I agree with you. I do think we should be celebrating differences. I don't like this notion of removing differences. I think we should celebrate the differences, but at the end of the day, come together.
Yeah,
Unite.
definitely.
Yeah, amazing. So, talk to me a bit about your family then. You said you were born here in the UK.
Yeah, so my grandpa came here with my mum when she was 15, I think. My granddad was the first black man in our area.
Wow.
He was a diplomat and he managed a hospital in London. But yeah, my mum was only 15 when she came here, along with her two siblings. So yeah, that's pretty much it. My dad and my mum got married and he also moved to England. And then here I am.
Amazing, love it. So did they teach you about your heritage and your histories, or was it ever taught in school, or did it all predominantly come from your parents?
I've never learned anything about my heritage in school. When they talk about the Egyptian side, they talk about ancient Egyptians, they'll pretty much go, here's a pyramid.
Some hieroglyphs.
That's as far as it stretches, and that's really not my culture. I mean, obviously it has connections to my history, but a pyramid isn't my culture. I learned everything that I know about my culture from my family. I learned about our tribe in Ethiopia, the Afar. I learned about the food. I learned about every aspect of my culture from my family.
Amazing. Did they have to have any sort of conversations with you? I've spoken to quite a lot of people where they've been told by their parents, to be aware of the colour of their skin living here in the UK. Have you had those sort of conversations with your family?
Yeah, I mean, my family have always tried to make it seem like we're all equal. And when I didn't really have very many. The first incidents of racism that I remember are in primary school, because I didn't speak English when I was in nursery, but I picked up English pretty quickly.
Wow,
As
okay.
you can tell, I didn't have an accent or anything. And I went into primary school thinking like, oh, I'm normal, like I go in and I'm the only person of color in the whole school.
Oh.
And this kind of makes me think as well, like I have a much paler skin tone than the rest of my family, so I can't imagine how much worse it could be for other people. But for me, I stuck out like a sore thumb because I was the only person of colour. I had different hair, different features. Also, like, it's quite common in African and Caribbean kids to hit puberty much faster and develop much faster. And these were kind of like, it was very, very easy for them to pick on me because they'd never seen anybody like me before. Everyone that they'd seen before was white. And I remember, I'd say the worst incident was when I think I was quite young at the time. Some people from the school, the classmates, helped me down and a girl punched me in the stomach. And my mum complained to the school, and what they did was they made the class apologise to me. It was, oh, sorry, Karima. And that was about it. And it didn't stop them from picking on me for the rest of that time. And I think from then on, my family have always been very cautious because my family's Muslim as well. So it's kind of like the added Islamophobia on top of the racism.
Of course.
And we were the only Muslims in the school as well. So it was kind of like, from then on, I've always been very cautious about who I am, especially with my name is quite foreign as well. So people see my name and see stuff like that. And yeah, I guess it's from then on was when I started really thinking about myself as different, which is quite sad because I quite like to think that I wouldn't have to think about those things, but it is a conversation that they had to have with me. I have it with my sister as well.
Right.
how it goes.
It's just such a shame that, like we said earlier, like it'd be amazing to just embrace these differences and celebrate these differences. Do you think had the school looked at it in that way, it would have made a difference to your school life if they'd have, you know, actually educated the other children about it? Maybe we could have stopped any more things from happening to you.
Oh yeah, 100%, because I think all of this stuff is learned. No kid
Absolutely.
comes out going, oh yeah, I don't like you because your hair's frizzier than mine. Like, that is not a thing that happens. It's all learned. And if they had educated those kids about different cultures, about differences, then we wouldn't have these problems. I mean, an example is my sister. She's much darker than me, and she had a lot of issues in school. And one that really confused me was she was in at school with some girls, and they were brushing their hair, and one of them had curly hair, but obviously white people's texture hair is very different. So when she brushed her hair, obviously the curl just reformed because she has much softer hair than we do. But because they hadn't taught the kids that people can have different texture hair, they would say to Noor, oh, you don't brush your hair, that's so disgusting, you're disgusting because you don't brush your hair. If she brushed her hair, it would, you know, it would be completely different, it would go huge. And it was just because she has a different texture hair, but they didn't understand that because they weren't taught that. And I just really think that if we had some education, not only about stuff like that, but also Black history and the meaning behind stuff. We get called racial slurs all the time. Why aren't we taught in school the meaning behind racial slurs? Because once you know the meaning behind a word, you're much less likely to use it as liberally.
Absolutely. It's a bit like swear words, isn't it? So we're all taught not to say swear words as we grow up, so we don't say them as children. It's exactly the same principle. Why aren't we taught about things that really insult a person's race and heritage? And you know, it's a very good point, and I don't know why schools don't do this. It's definitely something that we need to change. I think that would be a very good way to start it. Have your family ever sort of had any hardships within living in the country?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of my mum, she's had people try and rip off her headscarf, just open in public. She's been going about her business, and people try and yank it off. She's had trouble in so many different aspects. We've had a lot of trouble with our neighbours. Some of them were okay, but a majority, when obviously the first Black family moving in is not going to be accepted. Like, I live in quite a small, very, very, very white village.
Oh, really?
So it's like 90-something% white. So they didn't take that very well. I remember my mum was telling me when she was 16, she knocked on the neighbour's door to give them a Christmas card. And they opened the door and they were really aggressive, like, what do you want? Get out of here, all of this stuff. And we still live next door to that same person.
Wow.
And she's still the same to this day. They weren't welcome very much. And the same with my sister. Like I said, she has a darker complexion than me. And she's always had a lot of trouble with racial slurs. I remember when she was in school, people would say to her, I don't want to play with you because you're Black. I don't want to go near you because you're Muslim. Like, even she's just finished secondary school and she had a lot of trouble in secondary school with racial slurs as well. And all of this gets reported to the school and stuff, but they just don't do enough.
No one does anything.
Being done.
What do you think, well, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but what else do you think schools can do to sort of combat this? Because it is a real problem that, I mean, a lot of white people just don't notice it, they don't see it. I mean, I went to a predominantly white school. I think there was about 3 people of colour in our school, and obviously I will have had a very different experience then, but we were never taught about different races, different heritages. We just weren't, it just didn't come up. How do you think, or is there any other ways that you think that schools can do this?
I think there's so much that schools can do that they're not doing. I think it needs to be, first of all, integrated into the school curriculum. It needs to be mandatory.
Yeah.
And I think that it needs to start from a young age, but I also think that they need to be educating parents as well, because even if kids learn stuff in school, it's not going to make a difference. And I think that it's taken too lightly. From my perspective, like, I look back on it now, it was over 10 years ago, the stuff that happened to me in primary school. Those people probably don't even remember. Like, I'm pretty sure that they don't even remember doing what they did to me. But for me, that stayed with me for forever. I spent the next 8 years of my life wearing loads of makeup, straightening my hair, and I have the privilege to be able to try and whitewash myself and make myself look white, but I shouldn't have to.
No, absolutely.
And that makes me think, like, we need to be teaching Black history. We need to be teaching about racism, and not just saying, oh, don't do this. We need to tell them the meaning. We need to help them understand why this is bad.
Exactly.
We need to help them understand why you have privilege as a white person. We're not saying that you don't have problems. We're not saying that you're privileged above everybody else. We're just saying that your skin color isn't a problem.
Exactly.
Just like everybody else. And so I think that's just something that needs to be taught. It needs to be integrated in schools. And there's so many resources that you can refer to, so many books, so many films in every single different form. It's not difficult to educate yourself. People just need to go and do it. It's not the responsibility of people of color to educate you. You need to go out and educate yourself. It's now's the time to stop, listen, learn, and put it into action.
I completely agree. That is exactly why we've set up our platform, because we wanted to give a voice to people without people of colour having to educate everyone. It is about self-education. I mean, I've checked my white privilege just from doing this journey. I know you've set up a campaign as well, an anti-racist campaign. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in your area? Yeah,
so like I said before, I live in a very white area. So I decided to set up a group called Bracknell Against Racism, which is the area that I live in. And basically, at first, I just wanted a safe space, because I literally thought to myself, if this is how it is for me, and I'm light skinned, how is it for people who are like Black, who are all of these different people from different races, people who are darker have a much harder time. So I'm thinking they need a safe space. They need a platform to be able to have their voices heard. They need to rant, anything. So I created this group. And then I kind of thought to myself, this can be my opportunity. And it basically became so many people joining from my area. And
that's great.
So I thought to myself, I can use this opportunity to educate them, because they were mostly white that joined. So I was like, well, this is definitely a great opportunity. So I started posting educational content. It then went on to making resources for young kids, adults, medical staff as well. I had a unit assistant message me and asked me to make that. I'm in the process of making resources for the Muslim community as well. So yeah, it's just kind of stemmed on from there. But I've had so many people messaging me, pouring their hearts out to me. And I think that it motivates me to carry on doing what I'm doing, because I know that I'm providing a safe space for people while also educating on important issues.
I think that's fantastic that you're doing that. And I mean, it's great to see that you're getting a good reception from people as well. So have you found that quite a lot of white people are really open to learning and, recognizing their privilege?
I think it's been a struggle. There have been people, majority of people, who have been very receptive to what I have to say, but there is still this kind of narrative that when a person of color is trying to educate you about something, it becomes like defensive. It's like immediately the walls are up. Like if I say to you, this is what you've said is discriminatory, or what you've said is racist, it's immediately, oh no, I'm not racist, I'm not this. And that's, I think, where we're going wrong. We need to just stop, listen to what they have to say. Don't be defensive. Just say, sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it. Let's learn from it. Let's try and move on from it. And I think getting past that wall is going to be the most difficult thing for us, because people don't want to hear it. They've gone their whole lives not hearing it, and they don't want to hear it. So I think once we've got past that wall, people understand it. And some people I have broken through, I've had conversations with them where they've been like, oh no, racism doesn't exist, and this, that, and the other, and whipping out random statistics that aren't in proportion and stuff like that. The usual defensive line. And I've managed to get through to so many people, kind of just explain to them on a humanistic level as well about it, and they're so much more receptive. So I think it's going to take a lot of time, and people are going to have to be a lot more open for this to work.
I agree. Do you have any sort of advice or any words that have worked quite well for you to sort of bring these people around to understanding how you feel and why they're being racist?
I think the way that I think about it is I try and make it as simplistic as possible. I try and make it so I make comparisons to like other examples and stuff to try and make it like very obvious. But there's always going to be people that you can't get through to. But I would say using comparisons, like for example with the statue stuff, people said, oh, but he was a good person because he did some charity work or something. And you'd say to them, well, if somebody murdered your whole family but then spent a load of money saving small children from cancer, would you still put a statue of them in your back garden? You wouldn't,
Really
would
good
you?
example.
And I think explaining it in really like simplistic terms and relating to real life stuff makes a difference. Like, think to yourself, if this person was white, would you be thinking the same way? Would you be saying the same thing? Does it matter that that person doesn't originate from this country? Does that matter? There's this narrative of thinking that everyone who's British is white. I was born in England, so I'm British, but that doesn't stop me from being able to identify with my culture and my heritage. It just means that I'm also British, and you can't say, "Oh, go back to your own country." You know the microaggressions that tend to. That is something that really gets on my nerves. Is these microaggressions, and that I think that's also one of the more difficult things. When it's overt racism, it's easier to go, "This is the problem. You shouldn't be saying this."
Yeah.
But with microaggressions, it's a completely different story. It's stuff like they won't see what's wrong with it, or people touching my hair, or someone saying to me, "Oh, you're mixed. You're so exotic." Or say, yeah, I've heard that one a lot. Stuff like, "Oh, you're a terrorist," or do really silly questions like, "Do you live in a mud hut?" Or do your family live in pyramids? Do your tribe kill each other? It's like microaggressions like that are such a big issue, and people won't understand what's wrong with it. Why are you petting me like I'm an animal in Tesco? You know what I mean? This is the small instances of racism that, yeah, they're not as bad as obviously being murdered by police and the systemic racism we're experiencing, but they're still bad. They still shouldn't be happening. I think I'm just torn between what part of racism I want to focus on, but then I tell myself, you know what? All of it's bad. All of it needs to be squashed.
I completely agree with you. I think you made a really good point there. Like, the systematic racism is so much more overt, but there is that covert racism. I mean, even things that I've learned, I hadn't realised that maybe I've been, privy to before I've done that. And it's just about checking yourself and just, it's okay to admit that you have made mistakes in the past, as long as you are willing to change that and check that in the future. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you feel about these Black Lives Matter movement that's going on at the moment then? Because I am seeing a lot of controversy about this at the moment. So people saying it is actually causing a race divide to talk about Black Lives Matter. Obviously, we've got the whole All Lives Matter nonsense that's going on. What's your take on it?
The first thing I want to say is I've heard a lot of people saying, "Why are we bringing politics into this and that?" This isn't a political issue. This is a human rights issue. Mm-hmm. Talking about a race divide, there's already a race divide. Absolutely. We have been suffering from it for a very long time, our whole lives. So don't talk to me about a race divide because it's suddenly started affecting you. The race divide is already there. Absolutely. The Black Lives Matter is not saying that everybody else doesn't matter. We're not saying Black Lives Matter only. We're just stating that Black Lives matter. Absolutely. That just means that at the moment, Black lives do not matter in society. And that is a fact. Black lives do not matter in society. And we are just saying it's about time that we are treated equally to white people. Absolutely. And I don't understand why people are so angry. It's like, if all lives matter, then why aren't you? Then you should be fine with Black Lives Matter, because Black lives are included in all lives. Exactly. Why is there a debate? Exactly. Why am I arguing with someone over how valuable my mum's life is? Why is that something that I'm having a conversation with someone over? And it just really confuses me. And I think a lot of the time, even if you explain to someone why saying all lives matter is harmful, not only because you weren't saying this before this came up, this is now suddenly something that you're saying you care about. But if it's something you care about, go out and protest. Start a movement. No one's stopping you from starting a movement about something you care about. But do not take away from a movement which is fighting for the lives of Black people. Yeah. For your own weird agenda. Exactly. I think these microaggressions and this reverse racism that a lot of people are talking about, it's a way to try and silence the movement. That's sort of how I feel about it. And I think you've got similar views in that way. What's your perception of how the media are portraying the Black Lives Matter movement? I think the media is always going to be biased. Yeah. Every media source has got bias, and they want to catch the eye of people to read their stories. Yeah. So there's always going to be controversial headlines. And they also reflect what the public are thinking. A lot of media reflects the public. And if the public is predominantly racist, because it has been for hundreds of years, then the media will also reflect that. And I think it's definitely on the opportunists who are like rioting or hurting police or whatever. But Black Lives Matter isn't about violence. It's not.
No.
But the media keeps putting it out like it is. Like, for example, I've seen like the people who toppled the statue in Bristol were white. The people who hurt a police horse to throw a brick, I think, they were white. A lot of people looting, they're white.
Yeah.
So it's literally, first of all, opportunists. But second of all, why is the media focusing on items over human lives? Why are you more outraged that somebody has stolen a cake over somebody literally being murdered? Why is this an issue? And like people will say, oh, it's a US issue, and the media will relate it back to George Floyd. George Floyd was the tip of the iceberg. He started a revolution that was already going. He just relit the fire. And this is a huge UK issue. There are so many people in the UK that we're not talking about. Why aren't we talking about how Mark Duggan was murdered? Why aren't we talking about how Shukri Abdi was murdered and her death has not been brought to justice?
No.
Why are we spending millions of pounds on Madeleine McCann, who was left by her own parents, but Shukri Abdi was murdered by her classmates? There were witnesses, and those people have got away with it. Why aren't we getting justice for Belly Mujinga? These are all questions that I'm not understanding. The media isn't focusing on the important thing, which is that Black lives are being taken by the police in the UK, in the US, everywhere.
And it is simply because of the colour of skin, because we're getting so many arguments at the moment from white people being like, but more white people are killed by the police, more white people have police brutality, and it's not because of the colour of our skin as a white person. I know that if the police were to arrest me for a small crime, I am very unlikely to get beaten, I am very unlikely to get shot, I am very likely to get out of jail or not get as harsh a sentence. That's just how it is, and that's what our privilege is in that sense. What has been for you the hardest thing about living in Britain then, would you say?
I think the hardest thing is being judged before they know me. Okay. People, like, an example is like if I apply for a job, I will be confident in saying I have a lot of experience in a certain area, and I'll apply for a job in that area, a low skill job, just like a summer thing. And I'll know that I haven't got that job because my name is Karima Mustafa. And if my name was English, then it would be a very different story. And I think it's just the fact that people are judging me before knowing me. They would look at my name, they would look at my heritage, and they would make presumptions about me without knowing who I am as a person. And that's why I always reflect on that and think people who are darker skinned than me have it so much worse. It's that prejudgment is so much more intense. And I see it with my mum as well, like wearing a headscarf as well, like the intersection between religion and race as well. I'll see people judging her for her headscarf, or judging her for the colour of her skin, or judging her for her name, which is again foreign as well. And it just breaks my heart because like these people are doing this, and my mum is the most amazing person I know. And so I'd say, the hardest thing is just the fact that people will make this judgment about me before knowing who I am as a person.
Yeah, before speaking to you, before actually assessing what you can do. It must be so hard. Like we will never be able to imagine that. But hopefully change is coming, and I think what you're doing with your campaign is absolutely incredible. So like keep that up. What's your end goal for the campaign then? What's sort of the big picture here? What are we looking for?
I think for me the biggest thing is educating people, as well as like creating that safe space. At the moment I'm organising a protest with some ladies in Wokingham because the council had mentioned that they're not in support of Black Lives Matter because it's too political. So we're staging a protest opposite the council building. I also want to carry on making resources to educate people about stuff. I've recently been made the diversity officer in the Bracknell Islamic Cultural Society. So I think for me, it's just educating people about stuff that they just don't know about, and hopefully then that will make them think more about their actions. Because a lot of this stuff is subconscious. People won't realise that they're doing it. And I think making people conscious, like, I know this is an uncomfortable conversation. It is very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me to tell white people, like, hold on a minute, this is the problem here. And I can imagine how uncomfortable it must be for them to hear it after all this time of living in a certain way or learning in a certain way.
Yeah.
But I'd rather some people be uncomfortable than systemic, institutional and societal racism to carry on.
I completely agree with you. We just need to get comfortable with having these uncomfortable conversations, and then it'll become comfortable for us to move on from it. But yeah, I mean, keep up your amazing work. I think you're an inspiration to a lot of people, and hopefully, I mean, we get questions all the time on how can we help. Hopefully listening to you and what you're doing will give them some sort of insight and inspiration to go out and do that themselves. Is there any final advice that you would give to anyone in their areas about how to make a change?
I think it can be very taxing on your mental health as a person of colour in a time like this.
Yeah.
I think my advice at the moment is listen to what Black people have to say, because even as a person of colour who, for example, is Asian, or like my Arab side, like Arabs, you are still not experiencing that same racism that Black people are experiencing. Stop, learn from what they have to say and listen to what they have to say, because white people's voices have been heard for a long time. It's not your turn anymore. Step aside, learn from this, and for Black people, take time for your mental health. It's not your responsibility to educate people. It's their responsibility to educate themselves. So I guess it's like self-care for Black people in a time like this, and for other people, stop, listen and learn.
Beautiful. I think that's great. Thank you so much for joining us on here, Karima. I'm going to keep in touch with you. I really want to hear how your whole campaign's doing, so please keep in touch and let us know, and anything we can do to help, please let us know.
Thank you so much for listening to what I have to say as well.
No, anytime, honestly. Thank you. All right.